Hey guys, in this video I'm going to share with you not only the really stupid reason why I ended up playing affiliated in the first place, but also how I managed to take down not only one, but two competitive events here in the UK using my unaffiliated roster. Hey guys, Rich from Rich Mid Gaming. Hope everyone is doing fantastically well, and I hope you all had an amazing weekend. I have had one of the best weekends ever that I can, or at least that I can remember. Not only was I able to go 4-0, so undefeated at the Web Warrior Protocols Invitationals. So overall first, but it was a joint undefeated spot with Big Ron. But my beloved Leeds United also managed to stay in the Premier League by beating Brentford in the last game of the season. But I won't bore you with the sport side of things. Unaffiliated. It's a strange thing in Marvel Crisis Protocol because you're essentially giving up two things. First of all, a leadership, which really plays into or allows you to play a certain play style, and then also some of the best tactics cards in the game, which are obviously the affiliated tactics cards that you get that you need to be affiliated to be able to utilize. So I, as you guys know, have been playing Guardians of the Galaxy for most of this year. I managed to get the #1 spot. I managed to get to, I want to say it was the quarterfinals, I think, in the TTS League this season, losing out to Liam, and was having a lot of fun with them. But I decided it was time for me to try something new, try a different affiliation. Now, for you guys that have seen me play before, you know I like to play a very, very aggressive, sometimes quite tall, but that has been wider of late with the Guardians, but very, very aggressive, very attrition-based lists, trying to, grind my opponent down, take one or two models off the table, and then be at a point where I can just outscore them in VPs. So this is the Crimson roster that I was running for the most part, and I've been getting some reps in with it, playing it in a couple of competitive online events. And as you can see here, we've got Baron Zemo, Bullseye, Honey Badger, Hood, Killmonger, Kraven the Hunter, Nebula, Shadowlands Daredevil, obviously with his hand ninjas, Thanos the Mad Titan, and X-23. And there were some really nice plays with that. So, with Fear Grips, for example, there's a really nice play turn one that you can do with Shadowlands Daredevil. And I really enjoyed this list. A couple of the things that we sort of used to do with it. Shadowlands Daredevil really was the core, as was Killmonger, as was Bullseye. So we had a core of those three characters. And then really, the first other character on the list was always Baron Zemo. And from there on in, I picked any selection of the other characters. So at 15 threat, I'd either go for Nebula or for Honey Badger, obviously both at 2 threat, doing slightly different things. Obviously, damage output on Nebula significantly higher than Honey Badger, but Honey Badger having that too dangerous to ignore and sort of being her own little range one aura of Incinerate really helped with the attrition game, because this is what this list was all about. So after playing a few games with this Criminal Syndicate roster, I realised two things really. First of all, that I didn't enjoy Thanos. I'd played Thanos, I played with him, played against him everywhere, and I appreciate that right now people think the only answer to Thanos is another Thanos, and I think that's true to some extent, but I wasn't enjoying playing him. He very rarely made it into my squad, and if he did, it meant it was at the detriment of some of the other characters that I really liked to play. And the fact that both Shadowlands Daredevil and Killmonger were 4 threat each meant that I was quite restricted then in terms of who else I could play. Preferring to go wide rather than tall, which is unusual for me. I also realised that I had a number of characters, namely Baron Zemo and Killmonger, who both had charges. And being able to get those charges off round 1 to either be able to at least do some damage round 1, or to be able to even double tap the opponent, especially with the likes of Baron Zemo, who has that long move, could be really, really strong. So at this point, I turned to the bestest boy in the game. You all know I love me some Lockjaw, and he became an absolute staple in my Shadowlands Daredevil roster. We used the tactics card Advanced R&D. Mostly, if I wasn't playing Fear Grips, Lockjaw would activate first, which quite nice because it forces my opponent to make that first move up the board potentially, which is really good. And as you can see on Lockjaw's card, he has the ability that basically he gains 3 extra power if he activates when he's within range 2 of an allied character. Now, good point to note is that allied character can also be dazed as well, but it meant that he had 4 power round 1. And then depending on who I was taking, I would always advanced R&D at least 2 power off, 1 to Baron Zemo, 1 to Killmonger. And then depending on what the extract was, if it was a flip, I may save a power on Lockjaw so he can go and try and flip a point. I'll sometimes put a power on to Kraven the Hunter just so he can turn on Expert Tracker that little bit earlier. Also X23, sometimes pop a power onto her because she never minds being able to do a Claw Rush round 1. So depending on who we had in the team, but typically we would advance R&D that power off. And yeah, it turned the charge on for Killmonger and Baron Zemo round 1, and yeah, I started having a lot more success and really seemed to catch my opponent out in a lot of situations. This then led me to the draft night at Element Games hosted by Tony Moore, and yeah, I'll tell you a quick story about how that went and then how that became the catalyst for why I ended up with a unaffiliated roster. So going into the draft, I knew that I wanted to play Criminal Syndicate, and I knew obviously I wanted to play Shadowlands Daredevil. But when you're doing a draft, there's other elements to how you have to play the game. And this part, the game is that sort of pre-game where you are selecting your characters. So I was in, I think, a pretty fortunate position in that some of the characters that I wanted to choose were not necessarily high utilization characters, and they weren't characters that you saw splashed out of affiliation too much. So the core of that really was going to be Killmonger and then Lockjaw, and I obviously wanted to pick up Shadowlands Daredevil, and I got it in my head that I would like Baron Zemo in there as well, but if I could pick up Killmonger and Shadowlands Daredevil, that gave me 8 threats of Criminal Syndicate. Obviously, Lockjaw made that 11 threat in total. And then I'd only need to pick up one other 3-threat character from Criminal Syndicate. So whether it was Kraven, whether it was Hood, or even if I could get my hands on Bullseye, then I'd have no problems running more than 50% of my squad being affiliated. So I was then just looking at other characters in the game that had certain abilities that could turn on round 1 with an extra power. So I was looking at characters like Captain America Sam Wilson, looking at characters obviously like Baron Zemo, anybody that had a charge or anybody that had any sorts of throws and things that we could turn on round 1 and try and get that attrition that attrition game going as early as possible and really try and catch my opponent off guard. And basically the long and short of it is I picked up a number of characters, and I'll show you the roster in a moment, but it came to Shadowlands Daredevil. And I believe it was Duncan. I had already managed to steal Star-Lord off him inadvertently. I had... I was trying to bump up the price of Star-Lord. He already had Rocket, Groot, and I think maybe one of the Guardian. I was trying to bump the price up. I got too greedy and ended up spending 20 credits on Star-Lord. So it came to me putting out Shadowlands Daredevil. My plan now is quite telegraphed. And I got outbid on him. It got to the point where I just couldn't afford to buy him. So I decided, right, well, I'm going to pivot and I'm going to put together a roster that is just designed all around being able to move up the board as quickly as possible and start attacking my opponent. And this is the roster that I ended up with. So as we can see here, not too dissimilar in some senses from my Criminal Syndicate. I managed to pick up a Killmonger. I also got a Craven and Hood and Bullseye as well. So I could go Crimson affiliated even though I didn't have the leader, so because you don't need a leader. And I was at one point going to take the all according to plan card, but decided against it and really got into this mindset of, well, what I'm going to try and do is just use Lockjaw as that battery round one or turn one even, distribute power out to everybody who can use it. So for most games, or for all games, Killmonger and Lockjaw were an absolute core of there, as was Baron Zemo, and for the most part, as was Sabretooth as well, which caught a lot of people off guard. Now, to help with Sabretooth, because obviously he doesn't have a charge, and his spender is 4 power. However, by putting a power onto him from Lockjaw, it meant that I could then use, no matter the cost, do 2 damage to myself and actually get off a Savage Predator round 1. So a long move up, then a Savage Predator, and then hopefully get the finisher on there. So a wild and a hit for the finisher, and then be able to do a Claw Slash. So still being able to sort of double tap my opponent. As I mentioned, Star-Lord was a bad buy. He does have a hit and run. He never made it into my squad for any of the games. Hood did some really, really good work as well. Again, doesn't really benefit too much from the extra power, but at least, you know, he was some nice mystic attacks for when I needed them. And I think Craven made an appearance in one of the games as well. The thing I liked about Craven was we could use that expert tracker in combination with Interdimensional Bloodhound from Lockjaw, putting 2 tokens on a single opponent, meaning that something like Killmonger is going to roll 7 dice on his first builder, and then if we tap into them again, that goes up to 9 dice on his builder, and actually goes up to 11 dice on Black Ops Strike. So really, really increased the damage output. And I was very, very fortunate. I played 3 really good games at Element Games a couple of Fridays ago now, and I ended up winning the entire event. So taking down and winning that draft event over at Element did 2 things. First of all, it got me almost halfway to getting the Rogue Agent's badge on Longshanks, and I love me some badge collecting. And secondly, it really got me thinking about, is it possible to make this list even better? Obviously, it was a draft. I was restricted in terms of what I had, but equally, my opponents were restricted with what they had as well. You know, Black Order was missing Corvus and Proxima. I don't think Duncan had Voodoo in his convocation list. So nobody had optimal things. And it got me wondering, you know, was it a one-off? Was it a fluke? Or could you actually build an unaffiliated roster that was competitive enough to take down a bigger, more competitive event where nobody else was under any restrictions? So over the next couple of weeks, I got in a lot of reps. I toyed around with different characters. We tried putting Thanos back in there. Didn't really work too well. We tried replacing Thanos with Mystique. So we put Mystique in there really for her deception. So in the same way that Thanos would teleport somebody back twice, we'd get Mystique and she would use that as well. We put Omega Red in there for his pull, because obviously he would have that round 1. And toyed around and put together a few different things, put in reps, constantly changing the roster out. But the real core of that roster being Killmonger, Sabretooth, Baron Zemo and Lockjaw remaining the same. And fast forward to last Friday, and there has been a dropout of the Web Warrior Protocols event. I was originally invited, but decided not to go because I had other commitments. But at the last minute, a spot became available. My plans changed slightly, so I was on my way down to Walsall, but I had to put together a roster. And I had, in my head, two choices. I could go with my Guardians roster that I've been using all year, that I knew was safe. I knew I had a reasonable chance or a chance of going 3-1, or maybe even being lucky enough to go undefeated. It was a roster I knew really, really well. It was an affiliation I knew really, really well. I'd had some, quite a lot of success with them previously. Or I could go down my affiliated roster route. So I put it out to you guys and let you guys decide. And as you probably already know, over 120 of you voted, and overwhelmingly, over 2/3 of you decided that I should go with my unaffiliated roster. And let's jump in and take a look at what that roster consisted of. So here is the roster that I ended up taking. So obviously Baron Zemo there, Killmonger and Lockjaw, and they were the three characters, I believe, that made every single game. They were just the core of the roster for me. And on top of that then, we had Doctor Strange with Outer Stone. We had Groot. We had Rocket. We had Sabretooth, Valkyrie, Venom, and Winter Soldier. A couple of these characters brought some really nice things with them. The principle was the same. The idea is that we have Lockjaw. He uses advanced R&D round one, and he dishes power out to different people. Now, that turned on something for every single one of these characters, including Winter Soldier as well, actually. And I'll go through what it allowed for each one of them and my approach and why I took each character in the roster. Obviously, Baron Zemo, it makes complete sense. He's got a charge for 2 power. Doctor Strange, it did mean that we were able to use Hoggoth's Hoary Wisdom round 1, which meant that if I moved one of these characters up the map or up the board, he was at least able to potentially get into position and then be able to boost their defense. In addition to that, Doctor Strange also on his Bolts of Bedevilment has a short push if he does damage. Now, it's a range 4, 5 strength energy attack, so more often than not, he's going to be doing damage, especially with that Eye of Agamotto. And it meant that I could pull them even closer than they were before. So again, potentially opening up that turn 1 charge from Baron Zemo or Killmonger. Next up then, I want to take a look at Groot and Rocket. They have a card called Deadly Duo. Cost them 2 power each, and basically during Rocket's activation, if he's within 2 of an allied Groot, both characters may spend the power to play this card, and he gets to perform up to 3 plasma rifle attacks into 3 different characters. So turn 1, being able to do realistically 5 attacks, so 3 of his plasma rifles by using the card, and then the hope is that he generates enough power to then be able to do a Hadron Enforcer, is really, really powerful, or is potentially really, really powerful, and I'll get onto why I never found out the reason afterwards. Sabretooth we put in there. I'm going to admit I completely messed this up, and I realised after I'd submitted it that I didn't have No Matter the Cost in my tactics card deck. I'd miscounted them. I don't know what I'd done. I put it together very, very quickly on the Friday night, but yeah, miscounted them. Didn't have No Matter the Cost in there, which meant Sabretooth did only get to play 1 game, I think. But what he was able to do in that game is pick up 2 objectives round 1, which again was really, really important and helped me with the VP side of the game. We then have Valkyrie. Valkyrie is absolutely amazing in this roster. She has two things that she can choose to do with that extra power round one. Well, she's already an Asgardian, so she's already getting one power. This bumps her up to 3, which means that we're automatically turning on Asgardian Might. So choosing an enemy or a terrain feature, size 2 or less within range 2, and throw it short. Remembering that we ignore ourselves when we throw a character. So typically what would happen is I would walk up twice. So this happened, I think, in the second game. I'll have to take a quick look, but basically walked up twice, grabbed hold of Doctor Strange, and then threw him backwards towards the murder ball that was Baron Zemo, Killmonger, and everybody else. And yeah, causes some real problems. Or you do have the option, and this is a more risky option, but you do have the option to be able to move once and then charge, and then hope you generate enough power that you can do an Asgardian Might. Now that one is a bit riskier. I think if your opponent has already had a character pulled towards you and you can charge and double tap your opponent, then it's really, really good. But Valkyrie brought some really consistent damage overall. She could go out onto a point or onto a side, and hold that herself. The throw is so useful against some of the characters that are out there now, or even as a way of just being able to get rid of an Indomitable or something like that, or get your opponent to use a brace for impact really, really early doors, can be really, really good. And then when you do get the power on her, she's one of the very few characters in the game that I think can drop 10 power very, very easily. So, Warrior of Legend and Dragonfang, 7 dice, but then for every hit, or for every crit and every wild, changing a die to a hit is super, super powerful. And then, the throw, just to be able to, do that one chip damage that you need to with somebody and causing some damage on another character is really, really good. So she was an absolute workhorse. Don't believe the hype. People that say she has been nerfed. She may not be quite as good, but you get that extra power onto her round 1 and she is just as good as ever. Then we had Venom. Now, Venom was a late addition to the roster, and I was really torn between Omega Red and Venom, and it was really the tactics card Lethal Protector that sort of won it in the end. But why Venom? What was he doing? Well, he's quite slow, so he doesn't fit into the rest of this sort of list. Yes, Lockjaw is a slow character. He can only move short, but realistically, that's not what Lockjaw is there for. But Venom has his web snare. So again, talking about not having Thanos in the list for that movement and that displacement, what Venom is able to do, because our round 1 is always Lockjaw, advance R&D, dish out the power, it means that Venom could pull an enemy medium towards him or push towards medium, which was absolutely essential for being able to pick off a single character and then over the next couple of turns having, Killmonger, Zemo, or even Valkyrie go in there, do some serious damage, hopefully get the kill camp token on Killmonger, which is really what we're going for early doors. And also, as I mentioned, has that Lethal Protector, so really, really good for covering, in particular, Killmonger, who you want to keep alive. And then he's got the so many snacks, and we have Venom as a sort of reactive things that he can do, so he can just take power off himself as well. He also has a size 3 enemy and terrain feature throw, which is super, super important. Again, especially if you need to just get that last little bit of damage off, throws are a great way of being able to do that. And then lastly is Winter Soldier, aka Bucky Barnes. What does the power do for him? Well, it was really that Hydra tactics. So it allowed him to leap turn 1 and then potentially double tap an auto rifle, which I suppose is a quadruple tap once you add in the rapid fires. He's a solid choice for this roster, especially if you want to go for the gun line. In my head, there was going to be two different types of setups. There'd be one where we had all the characters charging up the board, so that was, you know, Killmonger and Valkyrie and Baron Zemo and maybe Sabretooth, and doing hand-to-hand combat. And then the other option was almost like if you've ever seen Dizzard's X-Force gun line. That was really why I thought that Winter Soldier, Rocket and Groot back there could be really, really good, you know, with a Zemo stood nearby to give him the rerolls. The reality is that never happened. I actually only ever played 7 characters in the game. So Zemo, Strange, Sabretooth, Valkyrie, Venom, Killmonger and Lockjaw. They were the only characters I used. So going forward, I do think that Groot and Rocket and Winter Soldier are probably going to come out of the roster. There's a couple of characters that I want to try out again. Should I continue with this? I've got the badge now, but I may want to try and get to 600 before I sort of stop playing them. But we're looking at Hood. I really want to put Hood back in the roster. X23 can do a really, really good job, as can Sam Wilson in this roster as well. And it may be that we potentially look back at Omega Red as well as an option when we're coming up against something like a Guardians or heavy energy attacks. And really, we don't really want Venom in there taking those heavy energy attacks. So, yeah, that's it for the characters. In terms of crisis cards, then we have Demons Downtown, Riot Sparks, Superpowered Scoundrels, and then Fear Grips, Research Station, and Struggle for the Cube. Why those particular ones? Well, Demons Downtown, obviously, it has the Incinerate. Riot Sparks is an interesting one, but because it's a D map, it means that Lockjaw can also control the map round 1, and it also, the idea being that if we did come up against something like a cube or something like that, we can get rid of that chip damage. I don't think I played that at all. Maybe I played it once. Superpowered Scoundrels. It's just 5 ways of scoring, and you know, typically I'm going quite wide, and I've got some really good displacement, so I can take people off. Fear Grips. I mean, everyone loves a hammer, right? I don't know, everyone does, but it's really, really good. Research Station is a super, super good crisis for me because it pulls everybody to the middle, and it just makes it so much easier for the murder ball that this roster is. And then again, we got Struggle for the Cube in there as well. Tactics cards, we went with Advanced R&D. We went with Deadly Duo, Field Dressing, Follow Me, Last Minute Save, Lethal Protector, Medpack, Seeing Red, Usurp the Throne, and We Are Groot. So going into the event, I set myself a little bit of a target, and I thought if I could go 2-2 or maybe even 3-1, then I would probably be able to get myself that unaffiliated badge, be the rogue agent. That was really my goal for this event. Didn't expect to come out there winning the entire event. And I mean, the main reason for that is just the level of competition that is in there. This is an invitational event run by Aaron Collier from Web Warrior Protocols. The scene in the sort of Midlands at the moment is, I'm going to say, the most competitive scene that I'm aware of in not just the UK, but I think globally for MCP. I think something like 20 of the top sort of 40 or 50 players on Longshanks were at the event. It was a 32-person event, I think it was. So didn't expect my roster to do particularly well. I'd also been televising what I'd been doing or broadcasting what I'd been doing. Most of the games that I'd played were streamed. Some of these players I'd already played against. So in particular, Jonah I'd played a couple of times with it. Quinn I'd played a couple of times. Ron I'd played a couple of times. So there were some players in there who would have already seen this, and once they saw my roster would know what I was going for and yeah, could try and counter it. But let's jump over and take a look at each of the games I had, and I'll give you a quick rundown of how each of those games went. So round one, I was up against a really good friend of mine, Chris Williams. Struggle for the Cube, Superpowered Scoundrels, and I was up against his Web Warriors being led by Miles. And Chris was in control of this for a lot of the game, but I was able to do a follow me activation with Usurp the Throne. I'd been chipping away damage. I would manage to deplete his characters down. I think he had 2 or 3 characters left on the board. Going into, I think, round 4 this lasted. The Usurp the Throne got me 2 extra points, and I was just able to basically pick up all of the cubes, control, I think, 4 of the 5 super powered scoundrels points, and just completely flipped the game on its head. And managed a 17-13 win. Game 2 coming up against L, one of the really good players from the board in Brum scene. He has been playing Criminal Syndicate a lot, but chose to play Brotherhood of Mutants Magneto. Obviously, an affiliation that I am very, very familiar with. But I think L just wasn't prepared for what my roster could do. Turn 1, I obviously went with Lockjaw, did the advanced R&D piece. He moved Quicksilver up the board. I was able to grab hold of Quicksilver using Venom, pull him towards the back of my board, and then between Zemo and Valkyrie, they just dazed him completely. It meant that he couldn't Asteroid M with Magneto, which was really, really good. It was a key part of the plan. And then going into round 2, Killmonger one-shot Magneto with a builder, which was a massive turning point in the game. It wasn't the turning point in the game, but a really, really big turning point. From there on in, the dice from both sides were pretty even, but just the amount of, not firepower, I suppose I had, but the number of attacks that I had going into some of his key characters, he just couldn't withstand them. And we got to a point where there was just Juggernaut left on the board. I had, I believe, all 5 of my characters, or even 6 characters, left on the board. So 11-9, we called it there. I think we called it as a table. So I scored the 8 points. I'd only scored 3 VPs going into that, but that was the Riot Sparks and the Research Station. So on that one, I completely ignored the VPs and just went for the kill, and it was absolutely the right choice on this one. Round 3 then, coming up against a player that I actually played at the Big Element 2-day event. And I remember playing against David last time round, and he said to me he hasn't played much and he only had the core box and sort of setup. So it wasn't the game at Element wasn't a very competitive game, but oh my word, was this a competitive game. Coming up against his Steve Rogers Avengers, we played Fear Grips and Demons Downtown, and going into round 4, I think this was, David was up 14 points to something like 3 or 4. I was so far behind in this game. However, in a single round, I was able to kill or KO his Voodoo. I was able to KO his Sam Wilson. And I was also able to daze his Black Widow, who would run all the way over to the other side of the board, holding a hammer, with the thought that, if she can hold a hammer over there for 2 rounds, then he wins the game anyway. So round 5 stopped him from scoring any points whatsoever. I also triggered my Usurp the Throne, which gave me some extra points. And from there on in, I was just left with dispatching Black Widow in the final round, scoring 17 points in total. The closest game I've ever had in Marvel Crisis Protocol, and one that I genuinely thought I'd lost. So props to you, David. Really, really good game. And we'll have to have that next one to see if we can even it out. Going then into round 4, we're on the final table, and it's myself, Ron, Alessandro, and Jed, who are all currently 3-0. I pulled Jed, a player who I've played against a couple of times. I think our standing is 1 game each in competitive games right now. So going into this was sort of a tiebreaker for us as well. He was playing Defenders with Doctor Strange, which, you know, as we know, is not the most competitive roster at the moment. So a shout out to Jed for actually going 3-1 in the event in total. But once again, the damage output from this roster was just far too much for Jed to be able to deal with. The rolls on this one were very, very fair. There wasn't any particularly spiky rolls. My defense dice were bad in points. His defense dice were bad in points, but you know, there was no Killmonger doing 11 damage into a Thanos type of setup here. So it was quite close early on, but as we got into the second round and the third round, I think it went to the third round in total, Jed called it and just said, look, there's no way that he can win it now. So meant that I went 4-0 for the event in total. And as you can see here, because it is shared spoils in this, so both me and Ron go 4-0, me with my unaffiliated, him with his Web Warriors. But because of the strength of schedule, over 100 or almost 100 more strength of schedule, more than Ron, did put me in first place overall. But I did get the undefeated trophy. And there we go, guys. That is the journey of how I ended up playing the stupid unaffiliated roster. So how we got there, and then how we actually ended up winning 2 competitive events, one of the most competitive events in the UK that we've ever had with an unaffiliated roster. And I think the key thing is that I got the reps in with it. I probably played 25 to 30 games over the last 2 weeks. Swapping out characters, tweaking things here, there and everywhere, trying out different things till I got to that point. And I would still say there's room for improvement in that roster as well. So to answer the question, can you win a competitive event with an unaffiliated roster? You absolutely can. I'm not saying this roster will work for you, it works for me, but I'm sure you can come up with your own unaffiliated rosters and put something together that is as competitive as this one, and maybe even challenge for the Rogue Agent title. Guys, that's going to be it for this video. If you have liked this video in any way, shape or form, all I ask is that you do leave a like. It really, really does help. And if you want to support the channel even further, we do have our Patreon up and running. You'll be able to find a link to that down in the description below. And if you haven't, join the Discord. It's completely free. There's over 500 people on there now. We talk all things MCP. You'll find all of your other favourite content creators on there as well. And we talk about all such other things as well, from MCU to other board games that we play. So click on the link, go hang out. It's a really cool place to be. Guys, as always, it leaves me with just enough time to say stay well, keep safe, and until next time, bye for now.